Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at two amazing trio albums for the ECM label, which would turn out to be the final recordings ever from this legendary bassist who we sadly lost back in 2020, almost 4 years ago. And this iconic bass player has seen it all, done it all, and played with just about everyone, from Bill Evans to Paul Bley to Marilyn Crispell to Wolfgang Muthspiel to Clare Fischer to Ralph Towner to Tonino Horta. You name it, this bassist has played with them all and is, of course, best known for his long association as a member of the legendary Keith Jarrett Standards Trio as one half of the iconic rhythm section with drummer Jack DeJohnette. And the gentleman I'm talking about needs no introduction whatsoever. I'm talking about, of course, the one and only legendary bassist, composer, and bandleader Gary Peacock. So, as I mentioned already, Gary Peacock has put out two trio albums featuring two remarkable musicians, pianist Marc Copland and drummer Joey Barron. And it's only fitting for Gary Peacock's final two projects they would be trio recordings, especially as it's an environment that Gary Peacock is no stranger to. In fact, you could say that Gary Peacock was a big part of helping to define the piano trio throughout the history of jazz music. And of course, he was a huge part of the success of the legendary Keith Jarrett Standards Trio. But what makes the Gary Peacock Trio different to the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio is the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio, they were more about taking famous pieces of music and redefining them in their own style with lots of improvisation. The Gary Peacock Trio, on the other hand, they do still lean towards improvisation, and there's plenty of that on both of these albums, but you could say they lean towards avant garde. And of course, Gary Peacock has dabbled in avant garde in the past, but there's kind of more of a looser feel to the Gary Peacock Trio compared to the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio. The Gary Peacock Trio, there's much more space. The music is very spacious, a lot more laid back than the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio. I mean, they were laid back, but the Gary Peacock Trio, on the other hand, they were much more laid back, and there was a lot more freer in their playing. So that what makes these two trios very different from one another. So for today's edition, I'm going to be talking about Gary Peacock's final two albums, which, as I mentioned, are both trio recordings. And I just recently listened to both of them, and I forgot how good these two albums really were and still are, because although Gary Peacock is front and center on the bass, he lets Joey Barron and Marc Copland do their thing, and they do their thing very, very well. Joey Barron, one of the most iconic drummers of all time. Marc Copland, one of the most respected pianists on the scene. And for me, all due respect to Gary Peacock and Joey Barron, Marc Copland is the real difference maker of this trio. His piano playing is so classy, so elegant, and he really makes the music breathe, and he really lets the other guys, do their thing very, very well. In some respects, you could argue that maybe the Gary Peacock Trio albums are more Marc Copland Trio albums because, he's all over this album. Not saying there's not any shortage of bass work from Gary Peacock, because there's plenty of great bass playing, but Marc Copland's piano playing is just really, really crisp. So for today's edition, I am going to be talking about both Gary Peacock Trio albums individually, and as always, I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge when you've got two albums featuring three outstanding musicians of this caliber, and any one of these albums could be a favourite because both of these albums are equally as good as the other. And I think what people will appreciate about Gary Peacock's albums is he's a very deep bass player, an amazing composer, and a great band leader in his own right. And people forget that, Gary Peacock has released albums under his name as a band leader, but the bulk of his career has always been a sideman. So people forget that, he can do the band leader thing too when he wants to. And, when you've got two incredible players in Marc Copland and Joey Barron, it's going to be good and it's going to be pure magic. So we're going to start with the first album, which came out in 2015, and this one is called Now This. So this is the first Gary Peacock Trio album, and this features Gary Peacock on bass, Marc Copland on piano, and Joey Barron on drums. Three incredible musicians, as I mentioned already, and the material that's featured on here are a couple of reworks of some of Gary Peacock's old compositions with new arrangements made, especially for this trio, and there's also some new tracks here as well. Great album. I was listening to this a few days ago, and wow, it just totally blew my mind how good this album really was. And there's a lot of great piano playing from Marc Copland, great drumming from Joey Barron, and of course, lots of great bass work from Gary Peacock. The music at times is a little bit on the laid back side. At times, it's a little bit more free, and every so often, it does kind of lean towards avant garde. But it's not what you would call a very wild album. It's a very classy, elegant album, and definitely one of those kind of albums you can, just chill out to and mellow out. It's a really good album. So let's have a look. So there's the track listing and the compositions. So most of the compositions is either written and composed by Gary Peacock. There are two compositions from Marc Copland, and there's one contribution from Joey Barron, and we've also got a standard by the legendary Scott LaFaro, who of course is one of the legendary bassists who played with Bill Evans for many, many years. And then we've also got the Gary Peacock Trio as well, and a very nice spacey picture. I'm guessing that's supposed to be the night sky. So very, very lovely. So we've got Gaia, Shadows, This, and Now, Esprit de Mus, More, Nor Blues, Christa, the iconic Vignette, Glorious Step, and Requiem. Some beautiful compositions here. So we've got 11 tracks, and a lot of the tracks are, they're not too long. Some are like 6 minutes, some are like 5 minutes, and the shortest track is like 3 minutes, and there's like a couple of tracks that are like about 4 minutes. But it's a really lovely album and great collection of songs, and there's no bad track on here, I would say. They're all really, really good and very enjoyable. So standout tracks for me are Vignette, Glorious Step, This and Now, Gaia, Shadows, and Nor Blues. But an excellent album and very enjoyable. Not like the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio, very different, but at the same time, it's kind of hard not to ignore the similarities because, Gary Peacock was a huge part of the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio for all of its history, but very enjoyable and highly recommended if you're looking to get into Gary Peacock or you want to hear him in a trio, then this is a good album to start with. So there you have it. Gary Peacock Trio, Now This. Excellent album. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2017, and this one is called Tangents. So Tangents is pretty much a continuation of Now This, and same lineup as before. Gary Peacock on bass, Marc Copland on piano, and Jerry Barron on drums. And individually, these three guys are outstanding players, but when you bring them together, magic not only happens, but they just sound really tight. And you can tell from Now This to Tangents, they've definitely built up a very strong and deep rapport, and they really listen to each other, and it really shows throughout the music. And Gary Peacock, a rock solid bass player, delivering excellent bass solos as you'd expect from one of the true icons of the instrument. Jerry Barron's drumming is like watching a painter using his brushes to create landscapes. He's just an absolute blast to listen to. And Marc Copland, as I mentioned before, the difference maker, he brings such a classy and elegant feel to his piano playing, and he just makes everything sound incredible. He is the real difference maker of this trio, and I just think he's an amazing pianist, and he's definitely one of the absolute best out there. So let's have a look. So there's a list of who plays on the album. There's the three guys, and there's the compositions, the man himself, and the other compositions as well. And there's the trio in action, and some production notes as well. So most of the compositions on here, same as before, all written and composed by Gary Peacock. There's one contribution by all three members of the trio. We see a standard by Alex North. There's one contribution by Jerry Barron, and we've got a standard by Miles Davis, and another contribution by Jerry Barron, and one contribution from Marc Copland. So unlike the previous album, Now This, which was all of the members bringing their ideas, for this album, there's a couple of standards, and it's very much more of Gary Peacock's band. You know, there's a lot more Gary Peacock compositions, whereas, as I mentioned already on the previous album, Now This, you know, there was kind of like compositions from everyone, but still a very good effort by everyone, and it's a true band effort. It's not just the Gary Peacock trio. I'm very surprised they didn't just name all three of them, because all three of these guys are very equal to each other, and they really bring something to the table, and they all each have their own unique voice. So we've got Contact, December Green Wings, Tempere Tempo, Cauldron, Spartacus, Empty Forest, Blue and Green, Rumbling, Talking Blues, In and Out, and the title track, Tangents. Excellent collection of songs. Really shows that aside from Gary Peacock being an amazing composer, Jerry Barron and Marc Copland are great composers in their own right. So they really do make the difference, all three of them. So the standout tracks for me are December Green Wings, Cauldron, Empty Forest, Blue and Green, Rumbling, the title track Tangents, and Contacts. But an excellent album and a great follow-up to Now This. So which Gary Peacock Trio album do I think is the best one? They're both great. I love both of them. Very hard to choose, but I'm going with Tangents. I think this was a great fitting and final chapter for one of the absolute true icons of the bass, and I just think this is a great album. The production is excellent. Both of these albums, production-wise, are great, but it's just something about this album. It really feels more like a Gary Peacock album, and you know, he's an amazing composer, as I said before, and all three of these guys together, it's just magic. You know, I definitely put it up there with any of the other great trios out there, like the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio, the Chick Corea Acoustic Band. You know, any of those trios. You know, Gary Peacock Trio, although a very short-lived band, what these two did together, these two albums, it's just remarkable. But Tangents for me is my favourite Gary Peacock Trio album. I think it's just an amazing recording, and definitely a fitting final chapter for one of the true icons of the bass. And sadly, Gary Peacock would pass away at the age of 85 years old. But there's nothing to be ashamed of. Gary Peacock has had one of the best careers ever. He lived a nice, full life, and he contributed to so many legendary and iconic albums. And it's only fitting for his final two albums that there would be trio recordings, because to me, that's where Gary Peacock really made his mark. And he was such a huge part of that environment for so many years. So great, beautiful final chapters for one of the true icons of the bass. And his body of work is second to none, and he's left behind so much incredible music that he recorded and was a part of, and it will be listened to for many generations to come. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your favourite Gary Peacock trio album? Was it Now This or Tangents? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening, and a special thank you to Gary Peacock for all of the incredible music that you have given us for so many years. Your legacy and your memory will live on forever, and you will forever be remembered as one of the true legends of the bass. And may you rest in peace.